So, good evening, everyone. Today we'll be talking about the Whipple's procedure. I hope you are all surgery residents because it would be somewhat tougher for the UG students. So, it is a very complicated procedure, and usually residents are very afraid of it. And I want to simplify it for the general surgery residents so that they can understand it and they can, when they assess this operation in their OTs, they can further appreciate the anatomy related to it. Okay, coming to the pre-operative workup and management. Before getting into the technicalities of this procedure, we must understand for whom this procedure is meant for. So this is mainly for a resectable pancreatic cancer. And so what is resectable pancreatic cancer? Resectable pancreatic cancer is defined as pancreatic tumor without evidence of involvement of SMA or the celiac artery and no evidence of distant metastasis. So you want two things. Yeah, you want that there should not be any distant metastasis, and the SMA and the celiac artery should be free of any involvement. So previously it was assumed and it was thoroughly practiced that venous involvement, that is mainly of the portal vein and the SMV, was considered as the contraindication for surgery. But now with the advent of many vascular anastomotic techniques and the grafts, we can also do procedures in those patients in which there is involvement of the SMV or the portal vein. So this means that the venous involvement should not be considered as a contraindication for surgery, as it does not necessarily preclude an R0 resection. So before getting the patient in on the OT table, we have to make sure that the patient suffers minimal complications. And for this, the perioperative anticoagulation is very important because this is a very long surgery and the patient is considered high risk for DVT. So we are supposed to give DVT prophylaxis in form of low molecular weight heparin and compression stockings. So again, as per the protocol of antibiotic prophylaxis, we are supposed to give antibiotic to the patient, and it should be the cefazolin is usually the drug of choice. Then we all know that there is something called PJ, which we'll be learning in the next coming few slides. That is the pancreatogenostomy, which is done in this procedure, and it is a very complicated anastomosis because there is lot of morbidity and mortality associated with the failure of this step. So we want this to not occur, and for this there are many trials have been done and found that if we give octreotide. So what is octreotide? Octreotide is somatostatin analog, and it decreases the pancreatic exocrine secretion. And in many of the patients, it was found that if we give octreotide, there was decreased chances of that is PJ leak. So that is the pancreaticogynostomy leak. Finally, we'll also see patients of periampullary carcinoma, CA head of the pancreas, coming with very high preoperative biliary, that is preoperative serum bilirubin. So in this patient, previously it was a mandate to get the bilirubin down and then operate the patient, but it is now the protocol, a well tested protocol, that if you are going, if you are, there is nothing, there is no plan of preoperative chemotherapy or radiation prior to pancreaticoduodenectomy. There is no need of getting a preoperative biliary drainage, as this increases, further increases the chances of cholangitis and wound infection. So preoperative biliary drainage is not not routinely done, and if done, the target for Whipple's is that the serum bilirubin should be less than 5. So you must have heard of something called ERAS. What is ERAS? ERAS nothing but enhanced recovery enhanced recovery recovery assessment, enhanced recovery pathways, which is increases the chances of patient getting out of the hospital in the least time with minimal complication and with less cost to the our healthcare infrastructure. So initially it was discovered or planned for the colorectal surgeries, but it is now being routinely practiced for other upper GI surgeries and the HPB surgeries. And something it is called staging laparoscopy. So, what is staging laparoscopy? Role in a case of patient undergoing Whipples? It is that sometimes, even though we have a very good CTs of what we call pancreatic protocol CT of abdomen, even though we can miss some of the tiny peritoneal or omental metastasis. So, in a patient in which the CT says that there is no evidence of peritoneal or omental metastasis, and still the patient is having very high CA 199 levels, that is it is a tumor marker related to the gastrointestinal malignancies. So, it is better to get a staging laparoscopy done. It protects the patient from useless laparotomy incision, and we get to know about a confirmed status of the patient, that is the staging. So coming to the indication, what is exactly the indication of Whipples? So in Whipples currently is now done for three major pathologies. That is the pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma, mainly the head, and then something is called intraductal papillary mucinous neoplasm, that is IPMN, and neuroendocrine tumors of head of pancreas and periampullary neoplasm. Previously, Whipples was also used to be done for trauma cases, that is the patient having duodenal or the head of pancreas injuries, and it was also done for chronic pancreatitis. But now it is considered a too aggressive procedure for both these conditions. So for the trauma, for trauma, if the patients have duodenal or pancreatic head injuries, we usually follow a damage control protocol, that is the damage control surgery. We don't do this surgery in a very sick patient. And in chronic pancreatitis, the Whipples has been superseded by the other procedures, which is known as phrase or something like that. So coming to the technique of the operation, that is the how this operation is done. So this procedure has three distinct phases, that is the exploration and assessment, then the resection, and finally the reconstruction. Each and every procedures are different steps and different careful red flag points, and we should be very sure that we do everything in a perfect manner so that the outcome is great. So coming to the very simplified model of what we exactly do in the resection. So here we can see in the image that the stomach is resected just distal to the pylorus, that is along the antrum. Then we resect the extrahepatic biliary tract along just proximal to the insertion of cystic duct, and we the distal GI tract is resected just few centimeters away from the DJ junction, that is the duodenojejunal junction. Okay. So coming to the anatomy, so as we learned that the arterial environment is somewhat tricky in patients undergoing Whipple. So we have to rule out arterial involvement, and we must know that in any case of duodenal adenocarcinoma, we also remove the head of the pancreas because of the shared blood supply of the C loop of the duodenum and the head of pancreas, and it's valid vice versa for the head of the pancreas too. If we want the head of the pancreas to be out of the patient, then it will come out with the duodenum. We can't keep it one of the patient, because keep one of them, that is the duodenum or the head of pancreas of the patient inside the body, because we have a shared blood supply to both of them. So here we can see that it is the superior pancreaticoduodenal arteries and the inferior pancreaticoduodenal arteries which further divide into anterior and posterior and supply whole of the C loop of duodenum and the head of the pancreas. It is the superior is the branch of the gastroduodenal artery, and the inferior is a direct branch from the SMA. So something is called the first jejunal branch of SMA that you can see here. You must be able to appreciate here that is this is the first jejunal branch of SMA. Here I have written. Okay. So if there is involvement of this branch also, it is considered as contraindication for surgery, because we don't have anastomotic arcades in this part of the jejunum. Okay. So first, when we do the laparotomy and we get access to the peritoneal cavity, first things should be first thing is to do the explore the peritoneal cavity and find any contraindication for resection. So for finding any contraindication for resection, we look for liver metastasis of any site, that is of any size, that is usually not detectable on imaging. That is why we call it occult liver metastasis. Then celiac lymph node involvement is also a contraindication for surgery. That is, and other is the peritoneal implants and hepatic hilar lymph node involvement. Now few of the contraindicating points which were used to be contraindication for resection in earlier days, but now it is not considered a contraindication, are invasion of the duodenum or the distal stomach. That is, we can further remove the stomach and then we do the R0 resection. Involvement of the peripancreatic lymph nodes and involvement of the lymph node along the porta hepatis that cannot be swept down with the specimen. That is, if the porta hepatis lymph nodes are involved and they can be taken out with the resection of the common hepatic duct, then it should not be considered as a contraindication. But if it is not possible and it offers a grave risk to injury at the porta hepatis to other structures, then we don't resect. So something here, it is a table which divides the pathology of the head of the pancreas into three categories. That is the localized and resectable, borderline resectable, and the unresectable. So first we'll learn about the localized and resectable tumors. That is, we have already discussed that it should not have distant metastasis, no radiographic evidence of SMB or HPV distortion, and clear flat veins around celiac artery, hepatic artery, and SMB. That is the superior mesenteric artery. Now coming to the unresectable. Unresectables are those tumors which are distant, which are having distant metastasis. There is 180 degrees involvement, or that is the encasement of the superior mesenteric artery, and a celiac artery abutment, and IVC involvement. Finally, the if the involvement of superior mesenteric vein and the portal vein is there and it cannot be reconstructed, or if there is gross occlusion of the SMB or the HPV, then it is also considered an unresectable tumor. Finally, the aortic encasement or invasion is also considered unresectable. So coming to the borderline resectable, what is borderline resectable? Borderline resectable are those tumors which are upfront resectable, but it would be better if we give some neoadjuvant therapy to this patient in form of chemotherapy or radiotherapy, and then it becomes much easier and technically sound to do the operation and get a R0 margin. So, so we should make it very clear that borderline resected tumors are resectable tumors that need some kind of adjuvant therapy for further surgical resection. Okay. So here comes there is two terms which are very popular among examiners, and they are keep repeatedly asking, that is what is abutment and what is encasement. So abutment is nothing but involvement of the vessel less than 180 degree, and encasement is more than 180 degree. So if there is abutment, that is the involvement of less than 180 degree, then we consider it borderline resectable. And if there is encasement, that is involvement of more than 180 degree, then it is considered unresectable. So coming to the 6 steps of pancreaticoduodenectomy, we have the 6 steps, and it is done stepwise in this form to complete the procedure. So we first do the exposure of the intrapancreatic SMV. We will discuss how we do it, what are the steps, what should be careful about. Then with the extended Cocker's maneuver, portal dissection, and finally we'll transect the stomach, that is we do the enterectomy, and then we transect the jejunum and dissect ligaments of treats, rotating duodenum under mesenteric vessels, and finally we transect pancreas and complete the retroperitoneal dissection by removing the specimen from SMV and SMV. So these 3 steps are the key steps of the resection part or phase of Whipple's procedure. After this, we are supposed to do the reconstruction. So coming to the technique, so what we do exactly? So first we put a upper midline incision. We get into the peritoneal cavity. We do what we explore the peritoneal cavity to rule out any contraindication for resection, which we already discussed. Then we do a wide Cocker's maneuver at the level of aorta, to the level of aorta, till we are able to visualize the left renal vein. That is, we should be very careful that we have to do a wide Cocker's maneuver till the visualization, that is the origin of the left renal vein, not the right renal vein. So here comes what is called artery first approach, or very commonly known as SMA first. It was routinely done in past, but now it is not done because of very sensitive imaging techniques we have in form of pancreatic protocol CTs and the angiographies. But we will learn about it, what exactly it is in further slides. So after getting access into the peritoneal cavity, mobilizing the duodenum, we have to get the access to the lesser sac. So how do we get the access to the lesser sac? We can get the access in 2 ways: by division of the gastrocolic ligament, or if we lift the omentum of the transverse colon and mesocolon to enter the lesser sac. The second is a better technique, considering that we would be needing omentum to cover the anastomosis, mainly the pancreaticojejunectomy. So in the first technique, that is by division of the gastrocolic ligament, we cause the ischemia of the distal omentum by as we divide the branches of the gastroepiploic arcade. It is the most common way in the most surgeons do to get the access to the lesser sac. But now it is proven that we should try, and it is preferable to lift the omentum of the transverse colon, and hence we can preserve the vascularity of the distal omentum, and omentum can be used to cover the pancreatic and biliary anastomosis at the conclusion. So after we have access to the lesser sac, we have to expose the SMB. How we do it? We do it by a kettle brush maneuver, that we mobilize the left right ascending colon, and the transverse colon and the hepatic flexure. So we get to get have we have a good exposure of the SMB. So there is 2 ways of doing this. That is, either we can do the kettle brush first and then the cocker, or we can also do the cockers first and then the kettle brush. So So it is previously we used to do the cockers first, get to know about the artery first approach, and check for the resectability, and then we do the kettle bash. But now, as we rely more on the imaging technique, we go with the kettle bash first and then the cockers manual. So here we can see how it is, how we can appreciate the duodenum, which has been raised from the retroperitoneal attachments, and we can see the left renal vein, and on the right side we can see a right gonadal vein here. This is the gonadal vein on the right side that is draining into the IVC. So coming to the what is called a tunnel of love, that is we have to create a plane between these two vessels, that is the SMB and the SMA and the pancreatic tissue, so that it can be lifted off from this visceral vessels. So this is called tunnel of love, artery first. All these things are same only, but it does it only does that it just makes sure that the resection can be done. So now coming to the popular SMA first, we have already discussed SMA first, that after adequate cauterization, we facilitate assessment of the retroperitoneum and relation of tumor to vascular structures, that is the SMA and the SMB, so that we can confirm that this tumor can be resected. So after we have mobilized the duodenum and the head of the pancreas from the retroperitoneal structures, we go to the porta hepatic, that is the porta hepatis region, that is the hilum of the liver. We have to clear the lymph nodes along the extrahepatic biliary tract. We have to ligate the GDA. We hope you are able to see the GDA here. That we will be retrospectively dissecting the common hepatic artery, and then we'll find the GDA, which will be ligating. Uh, Here the important clinical aspect is that if there is bleeding after the PG leak, it's mainly due to the GDA. So we should be very careful in ligating the GDA, and then we will do the resection at just distal uh, to the insertion of the cystic duct. Then we'll create a plane between the gallbladder and the cystic plate, and we'll get the gallbladder lifted off from the liver surface. So after this has been done, we go to the resection of the antrum. Here we are supposed to ligate the left gastric artery and vein, and we usually resect just 2 to 3 centimeter distal to the pyloric ring, and we resect the antrum of the stomach from a stapler or with a knife, and then the next step would be the transection of the duodenum. Duodenum is usually resected 10 to 15 centimeter from the DJ junction. Okay. After all this, after the transaction of the duodenum has been done, after a transaction of the duodenum is done, the leftover pancreas is lifted off from the retroperitoneal structures, and we finally resect the pancreas at the neck of the pancreas, so that the specimen can be taken out. So here we can see how it is done. The structures behind the pancreas, that is the visceral vessels, are well preserved. We are not supposed to injure the PV, that is the portal vein, and the SMV, uh, which is close to the neck of the pancreas, and we just have to lift it and resect. So finally, the transaction of the pancreas has been done. There is some of the close branches which directly drain into the portal vein, and we have to ligate them because it may cause a real very troubling bleed. So we will ligate this. We'll gradually see and ligate all these veins, and then get the specimen out of the patient's body. Okay. So, vascular resection of PV, that is the postal vein, and the SMV is possible. That it means that if these two venous structures are very much involved and the resection is not possible between the pancreatic parenchyma and these vessels, then we can resect these vessels and further reconstruct it by using directly doing the anastomosis, or we can use the graft. But vascular resection is never done for SMA. It's a contraindication. So coming to what is called multivisceral resections, it means that if the tumor involves the adjoining viscera, that is the transverse colon or the stomach or the spleen, we can do this. We can include them in our resection. The- Finally, the goal is to attain a R0 resection, that is a negative margin. So coming to lymphadenectomy, initially we used to do a radical lymphadenectomy along the retroperitoneal or the peripancreatic lymph nodes and the celiac lymph nodes, but we have found that it increases the morbidity with no survival benefits. So coming to the last phase of our procedure, that is the reconstruction part. That is reconstruction after the pancreaticoduodenectomy. So the most important and the most critical one is the pancreaticojejunostomy. So because why it is so important? Because the pancreatic leak is the major cause of procedure related death, and it should be prevented in all cases. So how it is done? It is done in a duct to mucosa end to side fashion with a retrocolic jejunal limb. We'll understand the meaning of all these three adjectives, that is duct to mucosa, end to side, and retrocolic jejunal limb. So here it is. So here it is a jejunal limb. We are anastomosing the duct of the leftover pancreas, the end of the duct with the side wall of the jejunum. So it is called end to side anastomosis. Okay. So first we fix the pancreatic parenchyma with the seromuscular stitches with the jejunum, so that it can be stayed over the jejunum. Then after doing this, we tend the anterior part of the duct of the pancreas, that is the MPD, and then we elevate it so that we can take the posterior stitches. Finally, at the completion, the main goal is that the ductive mucosa stitch should not be visible, and the pancreatic parenchyma should fold over the ductive mucosa stitch with the and so that it is well protected. So finally, the completed pancreaticogenostomy looks like something like that. And here we can see that it is end to side fashion and it is duct to mucosa. Now we have to understand what is retrocolic limb, jejunal limb. So here there's one more detailed image showing how it is done. So here we can see that first we take seromuscular stitch through the jejunum and the parenchytic parenchyma. Then we open the mucosa of the jejunum, and we take stitches, continuous stitches from the posterior part of the duct and the mucosa. Then we take the stitches from the anterior part of the duct and mucosa. Then we finally close. Here we can see we can either do it on the IFT, or we can do it without using an IFT. But this IFT should be removed after the anastomosis. So coming to the next anastomosis, that is the bilioenteric anastomosis. The bilioenteric anastomosis can be done either in a continuous or interrupted technique, and it is done with a 4-0 PDS sutures. So in the hepaticojejunostomy, that is the bilioenteric anastomosis, first we take continuous stitches on the posterior part of the CSD, that is the common hepatic duct, with the jejunal wall, and then after that we tent it and further take the stitches from the anterior wall. So at the end, it looks like something like this. That is the posterior anastomosis has been done, and the anterior is to be done. So after we when we tent the CSD from the corner, so we are able to get the space and do the anastomosis. Here the trick is that we should be try to be as close to the hilum as possible, because here we have a very good supply, and the chances of leakage of this hepatojejunostomy decreases significantly. So finally, the last step of the reconstruction, that is the reconstitution of the gastrointestinal continuity. It is done in an anticolic end to side gastrojejunostomy, and it should be about 50 centimeter downstream from the hepatojejunostomy. Okay, so we use the transverse colon and omentum to shield this anastomosis away from the PJ, because we don't want, if there is a leakage from the pancreaticojejunostomy anastomosis, we don't want the gastrojejunostomy anastomosis to leak also. So we need to protect it. It is usually done in a two layers using monofilament absorbable 3.0 PDS sutures in a continuous fashion. So finally, the final reconstruction looks like something like this. That is, we have the PJ here, then we have the hepaticojejunostomy here, and here the gastrojejunostomy. Here we can see that the limb of the jejunum is taken through the transverse mesocolon, and taken above it, so that all this anastomosis is done. Finally, this window is closed to prevent any internal hemorrhage. So it is final illustration of the completed reconstruction after pancreaticoduodenectomy. That is, here we have the PJ, HJ, and the gastrojejunostomy. So after all this has been done, then comes how to manage this patient post-operatively. Here the drains are used to be very important historically, but it is now believed that it's on the surgeon's discretion, and the level of dissection he has done operatively. And if he feels that no drains are needed, then it is justifiable to put no drains. And drain, if put, should be removed only if the drain amylase is absent or output is less than 20 ml per day. And since we already discussed that we are supposed to follow the ERAS protocol, so NG tube should be removed on the post-operative done day one, and the early feeding should be started. So what are the complications? So as we discussed, that it is a very complicated surgery with lots of morbidity and mortality. So it must be having few complications. So what are the complications? Complications are the leakage from the pancreatic anastomosis, that is the PJ leakage from the biliary anastomosis, post-operative sepsis, acute pancreatitis, hepatic failure due to that is the bilioenteric stricture, or the post-operative hemorrhage, mainly due to the erosion of the GDA stump, and then the post-operative gastric bleeding and the thrombosis of the superior mesenteric artery or vein due to very furious dissection. So this ends our presentation. Thank you. Thank you for listening me.